Hello and welcome to DayCreek.com's journal video. I'm Alan Stankovitz. I'm trying something a little different for a change. Get up with the real world and include some video along with the journal. So this is the first of many, I hope, of videos describing what we're doing here at DayCreek.com. Now, over the past few months, Joe and I have been researching different countertops to use in our kitchen. These cabinets are made out of hickory that were locally milled, and in trying to keep with the eco-friendly concept, we looked at different eco-friendly options for these countertops. And although we did find quite a few options, most of them, albeit eco-friendly, were pocketbook unfriendly. And after a long series of discussions between Joe and myself, we finally came to the conclusion that concrete was the answer. Now, although concrete itself is not an eco-friendly product, what you put in with it can very well be. And in this particular case, the mix that we've finally decided on, this is about 82% post-consumer product. There's recycled glass chips in this mix, as well as glass sand. Both are post-consumer, coming from the landfills where glass is taken, broken into chips, and broken into fine particles. So there's a lot of glass in this countertop, and there's also some post-industrial fiberglass material that's used as well. So we tried to make it as eco-friendly as possible with the Portland cement. So today I'm going to take you on a virtual tour of what it takes to build a concrete countertop. For those of you that remember Julia Childs, Julia was a French chef who had her show on public television, and whenever she would make these really nice, pretty, fancy food dishes, half the time they're already pre-made. So in honor of her, I've done the same and made this stencil ahead of time. This is made out of 1/4-inch Luan board, which is a form of thin plywood, cut into strips and then hot glued together to match the stencil or the countertop that we're about to pour. And you can see here that this stencil fits nice and snug between an already completed piece of concrete countertop and the kitchen stove. So let's take this over to the table and let's build a form. Here we are at the table, and through the magic of video, I've already made the form. But nonetheless, I will share with you some of the attributes of this form. You can see in the middle we've actually have placed the stencil. This was used to create the form, and if you see it says top. Well, what happens is that your top becomes the bottom in the mold. The reason for this is that we want a nice flat level surface that we don't have to screed or do any kind of fancy stuff with. And we use a melamine sheet, 4x8 sheet laid on this table. It's only 1/4 inch thick, but nice and shiny. This helps release the mold, so there's less trouble with that. And of course it's nice and level. And when you do that, it decreases the amount of grinding that you have to do once the concrete is set. Now, a couple other things I'd like to note to you about this form. The sides, which are 1.5 inches tall, are made also out of a melamine material. This is a shelving material, 3/4 inch press board that has a melamine coating on it. So we've got this nice shiny material all the way around. Now in this particular case, I've caulked all the edges. Some people, when they make these molds, caulk, some don't. I like the caulk just because our mix is rather fluid and I don't want that to be seeping out through the edges. So all the edges have been caulked. We also have this attribute here. This is to form an area around a post that is basically exterior to the cordwood wall, so that this will all very evenly match. So we're about ready to go here. All we have to do now is make the mix. Well, here we are, ready to measure up our ingredients. Now, I'm not advertising for Fresh Step. Just so happens we have 3 cats that really enjoy using Fresh Step kitty litter. Anyways, these buckets will work out fine. If anyone's familiar with when we built the cordwood house, we would mix things by volume. 3 parts of this to 2 parts of that to 1 part of whatever. And that worked just fine for building cordwood walls. But in this particular case, we need to get a little bit more accurate with our measurements. And the best way to do that is by weight. We want to make sure that the current countertop that we're going to pour matches identically to the previous one. And weight is the best way to do that. So I've got my bucket all set up here, and we're going to pour in some aggregate. Now, our recipe calls for 7.2 pounds of blue glass aggregate. This is the post-consumer chips that I was telling you about that are embedded into the concrete. They've been ground a bit so they have no sharp edges, and blue is hard to find. Matter of fact, I'm not sure if they're going to make it anymore, so I wanted to make sure I had enough for this particular job. Our countertop has some blue, green, and brown aggregate, but we need to weigh out 7.2 pounds. Well, it says 7.3. Now it's 7.2. As you can see, it's a great way to measure things out accurately. So I'm going to continue measuring out the ingredients, and then the next step will actually be making the mix. Here we're at the mixing station. You can see here we have an old rusty mortar mixer. This mortar mixer makes mixing mortar and cement effortless. Now, this is an old beat up guy. It's been welded, it's been bondoed, just cleaned out the motor, has some mice living in it, but it was the best $200 I ever spent. You can buy them new, they're probably about $1,800, but for $200 and buying one that at least works was a godsend. And I used it to make the mortar for the house, and we're going to use this same device here to actually make the countertop mix. You can use small aggregate in a mortar mixer like this, but you cannot mix regular cement which contains gravel. It'll jam up the blades and wear them out prematurely. You'd be better off using the old cement mixer for that. But for our needs, this will work just fine. Well, we're all set to get started here. We're going to put in about half of the water content first and mix up the cementitious products. Get that all mixed together into a milkshake type formula, and then we'll start adding some of the sand and gradually build up our mix. This water, by the way, has a plasticizer in it, which helps to decrease the amount of water in the mix, which in turn makes a stronger mix. Kind of get the bugs out. Alright, so I'm going to start the mixer and then we'll add the cement.
Now with the use of the plasticizer, we have to be a little bit careful with how much water we add. I really like it soupy, and this will harden up nice and hard, trust me. The plasticizer really makes a difference. It uses less water, yet makes it very fluid. So now we're ready to dump it into the tray. You can kind of see the consistency. We'll clean it out here. That's pretty much it. I'm going to do a quick rinse here. We'll be done with the mortar mixer, and then we'll take our cement inside and we'll do some pouring. Well, here we are back at the mold. We're going to start laying in the concrete now. I'm using a motor rigged up as a vibrator. Vibrators cost $400 to $500 for countertops or cement tops like this. This is just a cheap little thing, and we're going to give it a try, see how it works. Well, I think we're done with the vibrating. I don't want to over-vibrate the mix. I had to actually go back and add a little bit. And it came out a little bit moister, which is okay. We just want to get all the voids filled in. And that's what the idea with the vibrator is to get all those voids or air pockets filled in so you don't have any large bug holes. So we're pretty much done with this now. I'm just going to try to crawl this out a little bit, and that's pretty much it. Well, it's been a few days since we poured the countertop, and now it's time to take the mold off. One thing you might notice in this video is that there's an orange material on the sides of the mold, and this is nothing other than fluorescent orange Play-Doh that I placed over the screw holes. This helped to prevent cement from getting into the screws and making it really difficult to get the screws out. Now, taking the sides of the mold off, it can be a little difficult sometimes. There's still silicone caulk holding the edges together, so it takes a little bit of prying to get it started, but once it gets going, it peels off quite readily. Here you can see the top. We've got a few bug holes here, but nothing major, and some of the caulk is still caught on the edges. And these we can fill in with a little bit of putty, a slurry of cement. But we have to grind this down first anyways. So let's flip this over completely. I'm going to use a couple of the old rails here to give it some support. As you can tell, it's kind of heavy. Best to be done with 2 people. Well, now that we've got the countertop free from its mold, it's time for the next step, which can be a real grind, literally. We have our countertop here, of course, and what we're going to be doing is grinding the top surface to expose the aggregate that's hidden inside this piece. Now, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it with a dry abrasive diamond pad, but I like to use the wet because it's less dust, and I think the wet does a little bit better job as far as being able to lubricate and grind at the same time. So we have a special tool here that has a water attachment to it, and we're going to be using these diamond abrasive discs that are made for grinding concrete countertops. This is a 50 grit that we're going to start with, which is rather abrasive, but we need that in order to grind this top down. So let's get going. Now, in the first pass, all I did really was enough to take the cream off the top. And I try to do this just to make sure that I don't gouge the surface and try to keep it as level as possible. I don't want any peaks and valleys while I'm grinding. So I try to do this in steps to reduce the amount of valleys that might occur if you grind too hard in one spot. So the next step now will be to grind down to the aggregate, and you'll start to see some of the pieces of glass appear. Well, now that we've got the initial grind done, it's time to do a little filling. It's impossible, as far as I can tell, to ever get a concrete form or a concrete countertop complete without some form of bug holes or air holes. Although the vibrator really helps a lot, there's still a few holes we have to patch in this top. So what we're going to do now is to fill in those holes and then let this set overnight, and then tomorrow we'll do the final grind. The cement putty, or paste that was made yesterday, has now had a chance to set up. There's a film over the top of the surface here. We're going to take the grinder and grind that down with the 80 grit pad, and then we'll gradually increase the grit sizes until we get a nice smooth top. We're going to go up to about 400 grit, and that should be plenty smooth for the surface and yet still allow a sealer to penetrate into the cement. And that'll be the following step after this. So let's get started and do some grinding. Well, we've now worked our way up to 400 grit, and we've polished this enough. So I'm going to let this dry out, and then we'll go to the next step, which is putting it in place, and hopefully it'll fit. Ideally, it would be best to do this with two people, but I'm the only one here. So Joe, if you're watching, don't watch this. What I'm going to attempt to do here is to get the piece partially up onto the counter and then use leverage to get it the rest of the way up. I've protected the adjacent countertop with cardboard, and we're going to gradually put this piece in. It's going to be a tight fit because we already have a countertop here and we've got the stove here, so it's not something where I can slide it into place. So we'll see how this all goes. This is going to be quite an experiment or experience, something like that. Here goes. It's better if I stand on top here. Kids, don't try this at home. Don't do what I do. I'll just lift it. Okay, it's a start. We got the cardboard moved over. I'm going to gently try to move this into place. Whew, that's a heavy piece. Well, let's see where we are. Well, there you have it. It's in. We'll have to work on the seam a bit, but otherwise looks pretty good. Well, that wraps it up. That shows you the making of the one piece of the countertop. I've got other pieces to do yet, and then I have to seal everything too. So lots more to do, but this is the end of the segment here on concrete countertops. Thanks.